Hey guys, so I'm tying some redfish flies right now for an upcoming trip. I was tying in some wire weed guards and wanted to show you guys how I tie these wire weed guards. Now, these are by far the best weed guards I have found personally. They're super durable, super tough, and if they get bent out of shape, you can just put them back. They're also the easiest weed guards to tie in. So I think between being the best and the easiest, there's really no reason not to be using this style of weed guard. Let me show you how I do it. You can incorporate these weed guards into a myriad of flies. They're really simple and you can kind of make some variations too. I'm going to show you one of those at the end of the video as well. But just for your standard straight J hooks here, this is the way we're going to do it today. Before we actually hop into how to tie these, I just want to show you what's great about these. So like I said, this is wire. So if it bends out of the way slightly, it's going to return to where it was. So it's still basically in line. And if it ever gets bent significantly, so if it gets bent way out here to the side, all I've got to do is push it back to where I want it. And we're good again. If my weed guard ever gets kinked significantly, all I've got to do is come in here and straighten it out. It's never going to be quite as pretty as it was. You can straighten it out pretty well to being functional again. And typically your weed guard's only ever going to get bent that significantly if you have a pretty aggressive fish on the line. So let's go into how to actually make this wire weed guard. I'm using Malin hard trolling wire. This is a stainless steel wire. Just gonna cut off a small section of it. So what I'm gonna do with this small section of wire is just take a small pair of pliers or forceps and I'm gonna double over the end here. So I'm gonna take the very end and I'm just gonna fold that back over itself, kind of like so. Once I've got it in this position, I'm gonna take it and just bend it with the jaws of my pliers until it's totally folded in half, just like that. And that's all there is to the preparation here. To tie this in, I'm gonna run the straight end of my wire through the eye of the hook. And then I'm just gonna capture that folded portion and tie that in here. Usually I'm gonna do this at the end of my fly, just because this wire can get in the way a little bit. So I'm gonna tie that in really well, and then we can go ahead and take this wire and bend it straight up. And as I bend it straight up, I wanna make sure it's bending on the inside of the eye of this hook. That way it's out of your way when you go to tie on your fly. Now, the most important part of this wire weed guard is to make sure that you've got it bent over like we did. That prevents this wire from twisting or rolling. So at this point, I'm gonna take and whip finish my fly. I'm just going over that wire weed guard. All right, gonna cut this off. Now what I'm gonna do is just take my finger and apply some pressure here at the very base until that wire is right in front of the point of my hook. I like to leave about 1/8 of an inch between the point of my hook and my wire weed guard. I'm gonna take my pliers here. I'm gonna go about 1/8 of an inch past the point of my hook. I'm gonna slightly bend this wire back. That's going to provide a little bit more weed resistance, and it's going to keep from having a piece of wire sticking straight up that could possibly poke a fish and then to feel that fly and let it go sooner. So I've got it bent over on top here, again leaving a small amount of gap between the top of the hook and the wire, and leaving a small amount of gap between the point of the hook and the wire. I like to extend this weed guard about to the barb of the hook, kind of depending on the pattern, the fly, and the wire that I'm using. Important thing to keep in mind here is that they do make this Malin wire in different sizes, and you're going to want to go up in size if you want a heavier wire weed guard. That would be something you're fishing in either thicker cover or a larger hook. The longer you make this weed guard, the more flimsy it's going to be for a given amount of wire. So if I'm tying really small bonefish flies, I'm using very thin wire. For bigger flies like this 2/0 here, I'm gonna use thicker wire. This wire that I'm using here is 31 pound test. I did want to show some other variations of this weed guard. So this one's on a 2/0 B10S on a Clouser. This is a heavier wire because this is a rather large hook. You can tie these in on jig hooks as well. For these, you're not going to be going through the eye or your hook. You're just going to tie it in and then bend it. Again, here I'm using a much stiffer wire because I want this to be particularly weedless. Here's an example of one actually tied with double weed guards, so for further weedlessness. Now remember, as you step up the size of your wire, as you step up the number of weed guards, the harder you're gonna have to set the hook for that fish to get past those weed guards. So the weed guards work great As for being weedless, stiffer wire is better, but it does come with a drawback. Just for another variation of these wire weed guards here, this is a rather large fly tied on a gunner, bram, or swim bait hook. Now these hooks are remarkably weedless anyway, but I've actually incorporated a wire weed guard in here too. So I've just tied this one in backwards, folded that wire over, and then got it bent where it's still protecting that hook as well. So there's a lot of ways you can use this hard wire in your flies to keep them extra weedless. All right, guys, so there you have it. That is how you tie in a wire weed guard on a fly. If you've got any questions, like always, please let me know down in the comments, and thanks for watching.